Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 27th episode of the Plug in Play podcast. I am your host, Henry, and I will be leading you through this news-filled and game-filled year of 2025. We just finished up our Game of the Year episode last time, which was, I thought, a lot of fun. Really happy to do that. So check that out if you haven't. But this is the first real episode of 2025. Almost said 2026. I'm getting ahead of myself in a lot of ways. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the Nintendo Switch 2 reveal. What the heck? We're going to be seeing what Microsoft said in their developer direct. Sony apparently canceled a couple live service games, including a God of War one. Sounds like a big deal to me. And a couple of other big things, specifically Dragon Age: The Veilguard. A lot of news surrounding that recently, and I just finished it up myself, so I'm going to be giving my impressions at the same time. I think that's going to be the real meat of this episode, and I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. But before we get into that, why don't you just take a second, give us a like if you haven't, give us a rating on your favorite podcast service. We're there anywhere that you listen, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, the like. I've seen a couple of people actually listen to this on Amazon Alexa. That's an interesting way to do it. I didn't know people listen to podcasts that way, but that's what the analytics says. So I appreciate you wherever your Amazon Alexa is located. And why not give us a rating while you're at it? And hey, why don't you send an email into the Plug and Play Podcast Gmail account? That's plugandplaypodcast1@gmail.com. It's in the description if you can't remember or hear what I'm saying. And you can be a part of the show. I'll read any questions you got. We'll incorporate it. It'll be a great time, and you can tell all your friends, hey, I sent a question into a podcast, and they read it, and I felt important. And you should, because this is an important podcast. We also have timestamps in the description, a labor of love. Please take advantage of that if you'd like. And I think that's all of the housekeeping I have to get to. Normally I'd have something a little bit more of an interlude kind of thing to say, something not as related to the video game news or impressions that we have, but to be quite honest, this is a pretty stressful episode for me. There's a lot that has been happening over the past month. Really not like the past month, but the past couple of weeks. Stuff it just fell out of the sky. I was kind of stalling a little bit. I haven't had really a regular episode in the past couple of weeks, not couple of months, but like over the past month or so. And that's because I was like, it's the beginning of the year. It's probably not going to be that much news, not anything really exciting to really cover. And then like the first 2 weeks, first episode was like, probably accurate. And then the second one was like, everything just kind of happened at once. So like there's a lot going on here that I really want to discuss and I really want to get into, and a lot of nuanced stuff as well, especially the Dragon Age Veilguard discussion. So I'm going to do my best to get through that and hopefully have a fun time as we go. So there's a lot to get into here, and I'm very excited to get into it. So we're going to start with the big one. The 2025 year started off with a bang with the Nintendo Switch 2 reveal. This is an interesting one because obviously it's a big deal. Switch is one of the best-selling video game consoles of all time, one of the most popular things. Really, I know of a general audience that plays video games. You're probably going to be seeing them play the Switch. My little sister wanted a Switch just because she doesn't play video games, but it's just like her friends all were playing Animal Crossing, and so she just wanted one. It has that general market appeal that everybody wants to be a part of. And obviously it's old and decrepit, and like it is objectively like not able to play anything modern, so like we have to have a new one. Like it's impossible to like continue on with the hardware as it is. So everybody knew this was coming. This has been a long time in the works. I mean, we all thought it was coming out last year, to be quite honest, and it got pushed back. I think there were some component issues in trying to get the thing together, and Nintendo kind of schlepped it off into the next year. So we got this reveal now, but it clearly was not what Nintendo wanted. So in the build-up to this, the reason this reveal really even happened, let's be honest, is because a bunch of people were leaking the design of the Switch 2, and by that I mean accessory providers. So people who would make, like an add-on like cover for your Switch or something like that, they were obviously told months in advance, hey, this is what the Switch 2 is going to look like, so you can start designing these accessories for the Switch. And one of them came out and just posted the whole thing online, and they had claimed that they it was very funny. They claimed, we didn't sign an NDA, so we can post whatever we want. And then Nintendo, of course, was like, let's talk about this behind the scenes. Of course, threatened a lawsuit. And they were like, okay, yeah, we're going to take down everything we said. But at that point, obviously, the cat was out of the bag. Everybody had seen this stuff. They had already pretty much confirmed by the fact that Nintendo was suing them to take it down that it was real. And, Nintendo, then like an onslaught of other retailers that were making accessories came out and started posting their stuff. And it was like, well, clearly we can't really, put the cat back in the bag at this point. So we're just going to do a reveal. And that's what they did. They pretty much just out of nowhere dropped a reveal like in the middle of the week and just said, here it is. This is what it looks like. Yeah, look forward to the next actual reveal where we're actually going to tell you what you want to know. So it was, this reveal that to me felt very like, okay, yeah, you got a gun to our head. We'll do it if we have to kind of thing, in which literally all they just show is this is what the console looks like and some various like Mario Kart 9 footage, which they did not confirm was Mario Kart 9, but it's pretty obvious it's Mario Kart 9, so that's clearly like a launch title for the system. So essentially the tidbits we got here is Mario Kart 9 semi-revealed with a potential like 24 driver, like the footage we saw more karts on this track than we're used to. So the context clues there is it's likely 24 drivers. That sounds nice. The original Mario, or the last Mario Kart game, was technically a Wii U game that then got ported to the Switch with additional content, and became, I think, the best-selling game on that console by like a significant margin. It's a great game, fun party game. I love to play it with my friends all the time, but like it's definitely due for another one. Pretty much half of the Switch's content/library from Nintendo was just ported Wii U games that nobody played because the Wii U was a catastrophic disaster. So, glad we're getting another one. The Wii U kind of gave them an excuse to get away with not making one for a very long time. So looking forward to that when it comes out. It will likely be a launch title if I had to guess. April 2nd is when we're actually going to see the stuff that people really care about, specifically, the release date of the Switch, the price, the games, probably the lineup of the games that will be coming out for it. We're expected to see for launch titles and stuff like that. So really, the actual reveal that anyone actually cares about is April 2nd. The reason this even exists is because, technically Nintendo had never officially announced that this thing was even, alive, that it existed. So, this is just proof of life, pretty much. There was also some speculation around mouse functionality. Clearly, there's, an infrared sensor on the controllers that they kind of showed off as being well, if you turn it, you can put it down on a flat surface and it'll work like a mouse. And it's okay. A lot of people seemed excited about that. They were like, oh, the possibilities. And I look at that and I say, I don't see the possibilities. I see very little possibility here in terms of actual usage in a normal circumstance. So when you think about it, when are you using a mouse? Obviously, you're using it when you're using a computer. So you're at a desk in an environment that's built for a flat surface, and you can use a mouse. In the case of using a Switch, because this is clearly just another Switch, in terms of, which I guess I should say, is pretty much everything about this is just, it's a bigger Switch. It's a slightly bigger Switch, and the Joy-Cons seem to work a lot more what's the word I'm looking for? Elegantly is the word I'm looking for, than the original. The original Switch obviously had some issues with, not being as intuitive. This seems like the Switch Joy-Cons just kind of magnetically pop in and out, which is far more elegant, as I said previous. But it's either a handheld device that you're using on the go, or it's a console that you have plugged up to a TV. So when are you using a mouse on the go? Well, you're probably not. You're probably on your couch, which isn't a very flat surface that is going to be, capable of mouse activity, or you're going to be literally on in an airplane or something like that. And I wouldn't want to use a mouse on an airplane unless I'm freaking flying first class, which will never happen. So when is the actual use case for this for the vast majority of the people who will be buying it, which is a general audience? And I say not, maybe you'll use your ottoman as a mouse pad, that it just doesn't seem like, even if this does get usage and is one of those things that people want to incorporate into their games, I just simply don't see it being something that most people will use. So that's fun. And then backwards compatibility is a huge thing. I think it would have been horrific if this thing wasn't backwards compatible. Obviously, the past few consoles have not been, or Wii U was not backwards compatible to Switch, but Wii U was obviously backwards compatible to Wii. So, there was some of that. But Switch and Wii U were not backwards compatible because Switch uses cartridges, Wii U used discs. So there really wasn't a great way of doing that. And then a lot of Wii U games were pretty much designed without the functionality of Switch, which is a second completely separate peripheral. So, it made sense that you really couldn't do much there. This is going to be completely backwards compatible with an asterisk. The asterisk is not everything is going to be backwards compatible. I think the vast majority of titles will be. I think when they say limited capacity with an asterisk, they're likely referring to a Labo kind of thing or a Ring Fit Adventure kind of thing where you needed a separate peripheral where the Joy-Con had to be an exact size in order to work effectively. So those won't be backwards compatible, but I think it scares a lot of people to see that asterisk as oh no, Super Mario Odyssey isn't going to be backwards compatible. No, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think everything's going to be backwards compatible that you care about, unless you really care about Ring Fit Adventure and Project Labo. Then you're probably out of luck there. But anyway, at the end of the day, I see this as a pretty much non-reveal. This is pretty much everything I see here is something I would have expected, and something that has either been obviously leaked or heavily hinted at for a very long time by industry standards and industry talkings amongst people who knew what was going on. So this is a nothing reveal. I mean, honestly, I don't even have to know anything about the industry to really be super surprised that the Switch 2 is just a slightly bigger Switch that probably has better processing power in it or something like that, and that they're making a Mario Kart 9. I think this is a presentation that Nintendo had to shove out at gunpoint, and they were forced to, they didn't want to, and that's what we got. I think you really can't say much more about it than that. So yeah. I don't have anything else to say about it other than that, and I'm highly anticipating the April 2nd reveal, where I will struggle to try and get a pre-order in because you won't be able to get this unless you do that. Apparently, they are aiming for 20 million units, is I think some reports. I don't know if that I think it's either quarter one or year one. They're aiming for 20 million, and I think it's going to be the hot ticket item for the holiday season. It's going to be really difficult to get your hands on. So I think 20 million is probably low, but obviously in business you kind of want to hit somewhere in between, how low you think they're going to buy and how high they think they're going to buy. So I think this is going to be hard to get your hands on based on the number of units they're projected to produce, and I think the price is probably going to be... That's an interesting prediction. Okay, yeah, what's my prediction for the price of the Switch 2? Let's see. The current Switch is $300, I think, something like that. I think it's probably going to be $350. We're going to say 350. If it's not, I mean, it's probably going to be around there. I wouldn't be surprised if you see a 400. I mean, this thing, depending on what's in it, could go up to 5. I think that would be really bad news, though, for Nintendo. I don't think they're going to go to 5. I think this is 350 to 400. I'll be interested if they say it's in the 300s. I'll be like pretty happy with that. If they say 400, I'll understand, but like that'll be a pretty hefty chunk for a lot of people. Again, it just depends, and like inflation being what it is, you know, the economy. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting, but very, very looking forward to that presentation, April 2nd. Next, we have Microsoft's Developer Direct. This was the other big, you know, direct-to-consumer presentation from another big, I guess you would say, console player, you know, currently, but honestly, they're just a publisher now. Let's be freaking real. But they showed off 4 games. They were very much, you know, like hinting at, we have a secret reveal of a big game from a legendary, that was their word, not mine, legendary Japanese IP. So, like, you should be, you know, excited. And yes, Microsoft does have connections to Japanese studios. You know, like, we promise. we still talk to the Japanese, you know, like that kind of deal. So they opened the presentation with that reveal, which was very, honestly, like, I think there had been rumors of this, but like I didn't know about it, which was Ninja Gaiden 4, a new numbered release in the series. Obviously, we haven't seen a Ninja Gaiden game in a really long time, and it seems like they're really kind of pushing that because they have a 2D Ninja Gaiden game coming out in just a couple of months, which looks pretty good, from the same place who published Blasphemous. Or made Blasphemous and published like a couple of other 2D side scrollers like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Shredder's Revenge. So, like, you know, it's got some good names behind it. But anyways, this is developed by Platinum Games, which is a pretty big deal. So if you don't know, Platinum Games is known for like games like Bayonetta and I'm not going to say The Wonderful 101, but I like The Wonderful 101. They're not known for that. That was a Wii U title that went to die because it was on the Wii U. But a lot of like action games, really, is just the way to say it. They make a lot of really good action games that a lot of people really respect and enjoy. And I, for one, think like they are probably like the premier like action combat developer in the world. Like they really do know how to make a really good action combat game, and they continue to do that with pretty much every game they make, minus a handful. I think they've made like a Transformers game, which I don't think was like considered bad, but it wasn't considered great. I think they made like an Avatar game, and like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. I'd have to go back and double check that, but they've made a couple of licensed things just to keep the lights on, because ultimately a lot of their games don't sell very well. But you know, it is what it is. But this game looked really cool. I mean, I can't say my history with Ninja Gaiden is 0, and I don't mean that. I think there actually is a Ninja Gaiden game called Ninja Gaiden 0. So I mean, I have no experience with the Ninja Gaiden series. Growing up, it was always like kind of touted as like a really, really difficult game that like would just absolutely destroy you if you ever touched it. And I was like, that just doesn't sound appealing to me, especially as a kid. That, and it was like this M-rated game that I couldn't get my hands on when I was younger. Obviously that changed in like the PlayStation 3 era, but like I wasn't really into the series at that point. I kind of missed the boat, and like this series has been dormant for so long. I've had no interest in going back and checking it out. So when they showed this off, I saw the combat. I was like, no, this actually looks pretty cool. Obviously, like I said, Platinum does a really good job with their combat. I really appreciate and, you know, respect their development around action combat systems. And this is no different. I mean, it looks really cool. They showed off some traversal that looked interesting. They showed off, obviously, combat looking pretty snappy, pretty fast, and like pretty visually interesting as well. And I mean, who doesn't love freaking fighting as a ninja, you know? Like that's just the ultimate nerd fantasy. So like it's understandable that this game is going to be highly anticipated. The problem is like this series has had kind of like a tumultuous like reputation, I guess, is the best way of saying it. There are some games that are really good, and there are some games that are really like horrific, which ties into they shadow dropped at the same time of this announcement. They shadow dropped Ninja Gaiden 2 Black. They remastered Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, and they put it on Game Pass. So I'll be checking it out just for the sake of understanding what the series is, because apparently Ninja Gaiden 2 is like very, very well respected, and Black is essentially I had to do a little bit of research on this because I wasn't super familiar, like I said, with the Ninja Gaiden series. But apparently, when they put Black at the end of a game, it's essentially their way of saying like this is the definitive version. So like most of the Ninja Gaiden games have come out and they have had a Black, a Black release, which essentially means they went back, they retooled some things, they made it better than the original, and this is like our definitive version. Normally, from what I've understood, the Black versions typically make the game easier. There apparently are it's like unfair how difficult some of the original Ninja Gaiden games are. 3D Ninja Gaiden, I understand that the original like 2D versions were also very difficult. The 3D versions were like apparently like ridiculous, like completely unfair. You're getting shot with like rocket launchers and like 18 different dudes. But then like, Ninja Gaiden Blacks typically like basically take away those rocket launchers and reduce the number of enemies you're fighting, from what I have kind of gathered. But like then you have like these hardcore players who think that the game needs to be super hard, like your Souls-like fans. And then you also have people who are like, well, obviously it doesn't need to be that hard. It's freaking unrealistic and ridiculous and not fun. So like you have like nobody's typically very satisfied with any of the Ninja Gaiden games. But I would much prefer a game that's easier than harder. So especially when people are like comparing it to being unfairly hard. Like I would much rather play the easier version. So like this is definitely a good one to go back to and check out. And like I've been hearing a lot of very positive impressions. People are seeing, this Ninja Gaiden 4 drop and they're like, oh, or announcement, and they're like, oh, well, I'll just check out this game since I have Game Pass. And it's typically very positive responses to it. So I'm very interested in checking it out. And hopefully I'll give an impression about it. Maybe not. Depends if I bounce off too quick or not. I don't know. But ultimately, it was an interesting announcement at the very least. I don't think it was this big wow moment. It wasn't like, oh, here's Final Fantasy 17 or something like that. It was like oh, yeah, I know Ninja Gaiden. That's a hardcore IP from a Japanese studio. Yeah, okay, I get it. And that was kind of how I saw this, is like, it's interesting that Microsoft is showing this off, but I mean, I don't need Ninja Gaiden 4. I'm not that into the series, so it was okay. But, like I said, it looks good. I'm interested based on the developer, and they gave me an incentive to kind of get into the series. But it will be a day one Game Pass release as well, so I'll probably check it out. Next, they showed off South of Midnight, out April 8th, so just around the corner. This is just more South of Midnight. If you have not been sold on South of Midnight, this is not going to change your mind, and vice versa. It is a little bit more of a story trailer, so kind of showing off a little bit more of the characters and the world. No combat. And that's kind of what worries me. I am looking forward to South of Midnight. I have a Game Pass subscription, so I'll get access to it day one. The world looks interesting. The art looks interesting. I'm intrigued by the concept, okay? I am willing to give it a shot. Do I think that this game is going to be good? Like, I am heavily suspecting this is like a 70s game. Like, it could even go down into the 60s depending, but this is probably going to end up in the 70s, no doubt. And that's like because the studio behind it has never made a game that's like out of the 70s. These are the oh dang. What is the name of that game? We Happy Few. This is the We Happy Few studio, which is like the reason Microsoft bought them. Was like the reveal of We Happy Few was so successful. They were just like, yeah, we'll buy you. And it ended up not being a very good game. And they've made several other games, but all of them, like I think their lowest reviewing game is a 59 on Metacritic. And I think their highest is like We Happy Few, which was like a 69. It's like this studio has never made anything good, like even remotely good. I always think that their games seem interesting in concept, but their execution is always miserable. So, like, this game, I think its combat looks pretty mid, if not janky. I think the gameplay of this game is easily what's going to kill it. Like, it's absolutely going to destroy it. Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on it. I will hesitantly be picking it up when it releases on Game Pass and checking it out. I mean, I may not even touch it, depending on if it's like a 59 on Metacritic. It's not worth my time. So like, depending on reviews, I may not even touch it. But like, I am still looking forward to it. I want it to be good. We'll see. Which also kind of transitions into the next game, which is Expedition 33, from a French studio. Also, Day 1 Game Pass release on April 24th, so just the end of that month, same as South of Midnight. So this one is, like they've shown it off before, and a lot of people were impressed by it. Turn-based RPG, kind of, not Super Mario, Paper Mario, like active reaction kind of combat. You press the button at the right time, you get like extra damage, or you block extra damage, or whatever the case is. Really, all this did was really delve further into the story, kind of described it a little bit more, which they hadn't really done in one of these directs, and showed off the overworld map, which is very traditional, Final Fantasy-esque. So, you like zoom out and like your character is walking across like the ocean or the trees in a forest or whatever the case is. If you played a really old school Final Fantasy game, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. A lot of people were impressed by that. They were like, oh, I want previous, I want old school design in my RPGs because, that's what I grew up on. And I did not grow up on that era of JRPGs. I really got into the JRPG scene in the PlayStation 2 era, and that was way past that at this point. Like, nobody really did that anymore. So I have no nostalgic connection to that, and to me, it seems outdated, and like, I'm not particularly wowed by that. Like, if that's your big wow mic drop moment, I don't give a frick. Like, I really couldn't care less. On top of that, like, I already kind of knew what the story was. They've definitely done like press releases on that. They've never shown it off in like a very distinct way, but obviously the story is, like there's like a witch or like a, like a supernatural phenomenon that essentially writes on a thing like, this is every year it ticks down a number. And that number, if you are that age or older, you die. You're dead. So everybody goes out and tries to kill this like thing that's been obviously like slowly killing off the entire population. And this is the 33rd expedition because the number on the clock per se is 33. So everybody there is like 33 years old or somewhere in that age. So like, people are pointing out a lot of things that make them feel like this game is going to be cool. Obviously, the story certainly sounds interesting. The age range of the protagonists is something that people really are interested in. You don't see a lot of RPGs that focus on older people. It's always like high school kids. Like, the combat looks very flashy, very interesting. The old school open world or overworld design is something people are interested in, and there's some very talented voice casts, voice actors associated with the project as well. Clive, the protagonist from Final Fantasy 16, is a main character, and so is Shadowheart from Baldur's Gate 3. None of these things tell me that it is a good game. Like that is the problem I have with everything I just said, and what makes everybody excited for this game is none of those things that I just listed that people think look good mean this game will be fun or interesting in any way. Like, yeah, and it's another thing to mention here is it's a 30-hour game. So it's like, for an RPG, that's relatively short. Normally you're looking for like 50 hours. Like 40 to 50 is kind of like the bare minimum you typically see in a lot of big RPGs. So this is clearly like a smaller RPG, which is also kind of another red flag because most RPG systems need time to breathe. You need the ability to level up and, like kind of build out your characters in a significant way. And you can't do that if you are only there for 30 hours. Like, you need time in order to do that. It's typically why those games were much longer. But yeah, I mean, like I have always had my eye on this game. I think the more they've shown, the less excited I get for it, to be quite honest, which is like the opposite of what most people are saying. I think, like the more I'm hearing, the more I'm like, this is a small French studio. There's no such thing as a good game made by French people. I say that, obviously facetiously, but like at the same time, yeah, we we also legitimately don't have a great French development scene. Like they legitimately don't make a whole lot. Like I think Plague's Tale is like the biggest thing the French have made that like anybody cares about. And I don't even think that game is like particularly amazing. Even though a lot of people like 2. Again, I think it's sold by the concept. It's really not sold by much else. So like, I can't see myself being super excited for this game yet. I'm expecting, this game could be in the 70s in terms of reviews. I wouldn't be surprised if people just think this game is okay and that's it. I mean, it really super depends on if the game's systems are good and like transition well to a 30-hour, runtime, and if the game's story and characters end up being good. Which there's no way to know that right now, obviously. Obviously, the concept is really great, but like you can have a really great concept and horrific execution. So I don't know. It is too early for me to tell on this one, and you will only be able to tell with the final product. And I don't know. I am wavering towards this will probably be mid, though. Obviously, would love for that not to be the case. It's a day one Game Pass game, so I will have access to it, but it is, I don't know. It is something that I think will be likely mid. So overall, Microsoft developed, oh wait, I forgot. I skipped past the biggest one. They, of course, finish off the presentation with their big gun, literally and literally and metaphorically. Doom, the Dark Ages. Doom, the Dark Ages, obviously, out May 15th. That was their confirmation of the release date. Big deal from Bethesda, from id. And obviously the last 2 games have been very highly critically received and commercially received. I really love Doom 2016. It's fantastic. Probably one of my favorite first-person shooters ever. Definitely my favorite first-person shooter in terms of gameplay ever. Love it. Super arcadey, super visceral, super fun. You just feel like an unstoppable killing machine, and it never lets up. And it's just an absolute roller coaster ride, and I loved it. Doom Eternal I did not like, actually. Or I thought it was a big step down. There were a lot of problems that I had with it. Specifically, the gameplay had been completely restructured, which I just didn't understand why they needed to do that. That is always like something I look at and I'm like, why did you mess something up that was already so good? Like they kind of made it more of a like hardcore shooter. Like the difficulty obviously got ratcheted up. The speed got ratcheted up. It became way more of a Twitch shooter than anything else. And I mean, like, it was not, my skill set is just not that. I'm not good at that. It's like the first game I was really good at, but the second game I really wasn't. They tried to add a lot of weird platforming and like jumping around that a lot of people didn't like. And then a huge thing for me was like the story. I mean, like, I don't hear anybody complain about that, but like the story was horrific in terms of the game. The first game ends with like essentially a tease for like the bad guy for the second game, and then the second game starts and the bad guy is like your buddy, and like he's like been completely melted down into like an AI, and it was just like, well, what the frick happened here? Like where did I miss the novel that you released in between games that completely changed the story? Like, what is happening? Yeah, apparently that was the case because they actually addressed that in the this reveal, or not reveal, but in this developer direct, was they said we took the story out of the codex, and the story is now going to be outside and in the game itself. It's like, okay, thank God. Which that seemed to be a huge kind of running theme with this presentation, was like, okay, we heard that you may have had problems with Doom Eternal. We fixed them. And that's why I love this. So Dark Ages is a prequel to the original Doom, the first 2016 Doom. It is obviously set in medieval times. You have a big shield that's your big thing to parry things and block enemy attacks. You have a chain whip, or a chain, what do you call it? Ball and chain, spiked ball and chain weapon for melee. And everything is kind of themed around that medieval persona or motif. It looks like they are apparently quoting, they've changed the combat to a stand and fight combat model, which essentially just means you can tank hits and then you beat the frick out of people. And that's nice, because that makes me feel like it is way less about hardcore difficulty. Obviously, the stand and fight means you probably won't die as much. The difficulty is not something that is crazy. It's not Twitch anymore, and they even specifically say that, you are now playing a more heavy, lumbering Doom guy. He's no longer this freaking Pepe Le Pew, not Pepe Le Pew. What is that? The Looney Tunes rodent that's very fast. Speedy Gonzalez. Speedy Gonzalez on coffee. Freaking super caffeinated not Pepe Le Pew. Speedy Gonzalez. Sorry, it's been a long time since I've watched my Looney Tunes. But he's way more grounded and is able to. You're pushing the fight instead of running around in circles a lot, and I really appreciate that because that's more of a combat style that I would want. Here's the thing: you could say, okay, well now you've put yourself in a corner, right, Id? Because you've made a game in which is less Twitch shootery, more push combat, and one game that is way more Twitch shootery. You now have this divide amongst your fan base, amongst your player base, that's I want that Twitch shootery element, because that game still did very well and still reviewed very well, and I know a lot of people like it. But again, it changed so heavily. I think it did have a mixed reception, commercially, within the community at large. Commercially, I think it still sold fine. But they have introduced a toggle for just about freaking everything, from what it looks like. So you can toggle the difficulty, the amount of damage that enemies are doing, the amount of damage you're doing. Specifically the one that they point out, and I think the one that is the most eye-opening, is you can toggle the combat or game speed. So essentially how fast enemies move, how fast you move, and if you want that Doom Eternal experience, you just crank that sucker up, and everything will move, like a Speedy Gonzalez. Got it right that time. And you'll move in kind, and it'll obviously make things a lot harder to react to and a lot harder, more Twitch-based. Obviously, I won't freaking be doing that because I didn't like that combat style. But this is a really, I think, eye-opening in terms of they clearly saw that there was a divide here. But normally, when you see a divide in your player base, most developers just they kind of have to just double down on one of them, which that's the horrific thing about trying to diversify your combat in this way. I mean, which you really just shouldn't do, in my personal opinion. But in this case, they had to make a solution to it, and I think that's really cool. I hope that they don't see this as a continuing thing of oh yeah, well, every Doom iteration you have to have a different way of doing combat, and I'm I think that you just messed up. I don't think you need to make a different way of dealing with combat every single game, because I think Doom is specifically good at one thing, and that's making you feel like a demon killing bad anus. So like, I think we don't need to keep experimenting with it. I think we need to just find one that works and frickin' stick with that. Because you're going to eventually have a combat system that isn't going to appeal to a large number of people, like Eternal didn't with me. So like, I don't know if I love that, and I think this is their way of saying like, okay, yeah, we do acknowledge that's not the approach we're going for. We're trying to make it accessible for pretty much everybody, like depending on what kind of style of game you want from Doom. And I'm like, okay, cool. So like, they also showed off that there's going to be giant mech fights, which is freaking rad. Ultimately, this game seems to be really trying to appeal to a general audience, trying to fix the mistakes it made in the past, which I'm very happy to hear, and trying to be just an ultimate romp of just fun and brutality and, ripping and tearing. So, I'm really looking forward to it. Really looking forward to it. Probably, it's easily my most anticipated Microsoft game. Out of everything they showed here, it's like not even close. It ended up making the presentation, I would say, like worth your time. Even though I think, they probably get in a little too granular in these developer directs and a little too, hokey, showing off like these are the real people, real people who are reading a real script, it's like, okay, I don't really need that. I appreciate what they're trying to do. But I also don't appreciate that they're like, making them read a script at gunpoint. I just don't think developers sign up for that kind of thing. But I do appreciate we're trying to give some spotlight to the development teams with these kind of directs. I think they deserve it. So, it is what it is. But at the end of the day, I think this was a pretty decent developer direct. 4 games, not a whole lot. But at the end of the day, I think all of them have potential. I think 3 of them could be meh. Depending on how that happens, I think it's a possibility. So not exactly the stellar performance I'm sure Microsoft wants, but with Microsoft you take what you can get at this point, I think. So next, this is from a couple weeks ago. But I think it's a very big deal. I don't see that many people really talking about it either. But I think this is a really, really big deal. So this is Ubisoft news. I've been talking about Ubisoft a good bit lately, and that's because I think they are in some really hot water. Hot water in terms of like, this is a company that is easily going to be sold. Like, I think there is a high likelihood we see Ubisoft sold in this year, like this calendar year. I think we see Ubisoft sold. That's not a definitive, but I think that they are making as many moves as possible this early in the year. I think that it is. I think unless Assassin's Creed Shadow is like some massive success, you're seeing Ubisoft sold to Tencent, most likely. And they had a lot of news come out recently that kind of indicates nothing good. So, kind of started off with this, which is the kind of the big meat of the situation, which is Ubisoft. This is from VGC. So Ubisoft is reportedly in talks with Tencent to move assets to a new venture. So when Ubisoft describes this, they're essentially saying, we're going to move some of our IP, some of our games, some of our assets to a whole nother company so that Ubisoft's assets Ubisoft as a company will be increased in value, and they're going to give Tencent more power over the IP that gets put into that other company. So Tencent, if you didn't know, has been eyeing Ubisoft like a vulture for a while now. They own about 10% of the stock, and they've been in talks with the Guillemot family, who's the family owners of the company. They have been in talks with them to essentially buy them out and give them an out for this, while giving them still control of their company. Essentially, what Tencent wants is they just want a better portfolio of assets outside of China, which is kind of what they are clearly specialized in. They're a very heavily controlled Chinese company. So they just want a better portfolio, and they see Ubisoft as a potential get for that. This is really what I see as Tencent this is a really roundabout way of selling to Tencent. What this does, it technically does give Ubisoft more options here. But I think what Ubisoft's ultimate goal in this diverted venture is to lessen the bloat around Ubisoft proper. Like this is, well, we're going to get rid of X, Y, Z, because I think Ubisoft is an incredibly bloated studio. Or publisher. They have so many studios that are either support or working on who the heck knows what. I don't even know. They've got like a studio in every continent, I was going to say every country, but like every continent, I believe, like minus Antarctica, they have a studio. They are very diversified in their studios, but I think a lot of them are not needed. And I think a lot of them, their headcounts are way too high based on Ubisoft's output. So like this is Ubisoft essentially saying we will push a lot of those, like the bloat, to another company, or that essentially makes us, Ubisoft, a lot more of a understandable purchase. Like if I was going and I was a mega billionaire, trillionaire company or whatever the case is, and I was looking at a gaming portfolio to buy, I would probably look at Ubisoft and say like, okay, I like Assassin's Creed, I like Ghost Recon, or I like Tom Clancy. That's probably better. I like the Tom Clancy portfolio. I like, I don't know, your Star Wars, your Avatar. They don't own Star Wars or Avatar, but I like Far Cry. That's better. I love Far Cry, so like I love that. But I don't know about freaking all this other stuff you got going on. Like that all sucks. Like all these other studios, all this bloat you have. I don't want to buy that. And like if I buy you, I only want to buy those 3 things, but I don't have any interest in all the other stuff that's being bundled in, but I still have to pay for it. So like I don't want that. So I would completely be like, no, I'm not buying you. Like your price would be too high based on the actual value I intend to extract from the purchase. So like that's what Ubisoft is trying to do. They're just trying to make it a lot easier to buy. I mean, Square Enix, I think, did something similar to this recently. A couple of years ago, they basically, they pushed out Eidos, the makers of Hitman, sold off a lot of their IP to essentially make them a lot less bloated, and like some of their less profitable studios, that people probably wouldn't have wanted as much, they got rid of them. And that was, I think, in probably a preparation to sell if they needed to, which I guess they haven't needed to yet. I still would think Square Enix has a potential to do that, but I don't know. But besides the point, Ubisoft is in dire straits. So, like, I think the roundabout method of moving all these assets into another company is essentially just giving Tencent that stuff. Like, that's essentially what they're doing for the most part. And, like with the potential of Tencent or another buyer coming in and buying them for what they end up, kind of rounding themselves off as. So, like, I think this is another, like death gasp, like of, desperation from Ubisoft. Like they're clearly like in preparation to try and salvage what they can from the company, which is just not doing very well. On top of that, we have more news, which is Assassin's Creed Shadow got delayed again to quote-unquote incorporate player feedback to March 20th, which is like a month. So they delayed it a month to quote-unquote incorporate player feedback. That's some bullcrap. I don't know what that means. Obviously, it's very vague, but like 1 month of development time on a game this big, you're not doing anything. You're not changing anything significantly with this. This is just them asking for essentially more time to polish. They are looking, this game has to succeed for them. They do not want any more like Assassin's Creed like screenshots of where like you just see Ezio and like it's just his teeth and his eyeballs. I think that was a Unity, so it wasn't Ezio. That was Assassin's Creed Unity. Unity was like known as an incredibly buggy mess at launch, and like kind of went viral for like a screenshot of like the main protagonist with like just his teeth, like you could see inside of his head. It's like you could see just his teeth and his eyeballs. So like, like people essentially, not sent the game out to die, but I think it really hurt it. and people didn't want to pick it up at launch. And when you don't do that, I mean, you're either selling it for a lower price, especially with Ubisoft because they sell games, like fire sale. Those games drop in price really quick, and that's not good. Most games are making most of their money back week one, if not day one. So like it's just kind of it's a no-go situation if this game that is so valuable to them, like honestly, the company is relying on this game to succeed after Outlaws failed so spectacularly. I think it's a life or death situation for them, and they're freaking out about it, understandably so. And I think that whatever they're doing here is obviously not going to make that much of a difference. I think I'm seeing previews now, and I'm seeing mixed reception. I'm seeing some people saying this game's great, and I'm seeing some people say, it's another meh Ubisoft game. And I think I can't imagine this game being anything other than another Ubisoft game. And whether you love a Ubisoft game or you hate a Ubisoft game, this is probably going to be another Ubisoft game. And I don't know how this game is going to fare. I'm interested, certainly interested. I think this game still has potential to be like another like Valhalla or something where like, well, Valhalla is actually the best selling Assassin's Creed game, I think. But like it has a potential to not be reviewed well. Whether or not sell well, I think just the name Assassin's Creed is good enough for them to sell several million units, like no doubt. But like save the company, I mean, we're going to have to see. And I think Ubisoft is sweating here over that. The other big thing was Ubisoft then laid off 185 people and closed the DJ Hero studio. Both of these news topics are honestly a little small, but again, it's just like part of the whole as this is clearly Ubisoft floundering. This was essentially a part of a restructuring in the Europe area of Ubisoft. They laid off or they closed down Studio Leamington. So this is basically a support studio. Totally not necessary. So they helped out with Outlaws, Avatar, and I think they were working on Shadows as well. They were, just basically helping support people. It wasn't necessary to have them as an entire studio. They probably have several other studios that are just support studios as well. When you say this is the quote-unquote DJ Hero studio, they never actually made a game with Ubisoft. They were never the sole developer behind a title. The reason you may be raising an eyebrow by hearing DJ Studio or DJ Hero is because they were originally owned by Activision, and Ubisoft bought them. Activision didn't want them anymore. The Hero brand, which you may remember for Guitar Hero, was like essentially, shoved into the ground by Activision. They oversaturated the market with it so much that nobody cared about Guitar Hero anymore, or DJ Hero, or Rock Band, or all the other things that they were putting out around that time. And I think DJ Hero was already pretty niche in general for that situation. So they got rid of the studio, and Ubisoft probably got a deal and picked it up. And now they're laying them off because they didn't need them to make another DJ Hero, so they just needed them as a support studio. So the other 185, or other parts of the 185, is Ubisoft Dusseldorf, which is a fun name to say, Ubisoft Stockholm, and Ubisoft Reflections. So they're all being hit with part of the 185. They're all coming from various places amongst those different studios. Which I have no idea what any of those do. Again, like I said, Ubisoft has 1,000,001 other studios, and I don't think any of them are working on anything because Ubisoft doesn't have the output. They're not making enough games for these studios to all be working on something consequential. They all have to be working on supporting other studios. But this just goes into Ubisoft is bloated. Duh. Obviously, they should be getting rid of some people, should have done it a long time ago. And again, Ubisoft floundering here. I think this is easily, like I said, this is a sell situation within the next year. I think unless Shadows is some massive success, which I just do not see the world in which it is, I think this is Tencent will be taking over Ubisoft within the next year. and you're going to see one of the biggest publishers in the industry fall on its back and not be able to get up. And like this is, I think, just an ongoing situation where these big publishers clearly are having a lot more of a problem recently. I think these games as a service games are coming in and they're kind of stealing their lunch. If you don't have one of these lifetime games like a Fortnite, like an Apex, like a something like that, you're not going to succeed in this modern video game era. That's where the money is. That's where the time is. And like, if you're not doing that, like you're not going to survive. And I think Ubisoft has not figured out how to make a live service title out of all the big publishers. Ubisoft is the one I can think of that has not either been bought out or found a way to make like a live service title work and like be a huge success. And I think you can see that being a problem here. And I don't think Assassin's Creed Shadow is going to be that saving grace. Like, I think you better be crossing your fingers for Ubisoft. I think this is a bad situation. But yeah, kudos to them for doing what they probably should have done a long time ago. But heart goes out to all the people who lost their jobs. 185 people, that's a good amount of people, and it's hard to find a job. I mean, for everybody. So definitely a sad situation there in general as a whole. Moving on. Sony cancels 2 more live service games, including Bluepoint's God of War and Bend Games. This comes from Jason Schreier at Bloomberg, obviously probably the biggest video game reporter in the world, hands down. Always with those big scoops. He will come up later in the show as well. This is a surprise for a few reasons, and also not a surprise for a few reasons, obviously. The big first surprise here is that Bluepoint was working on a God of War game, specifically a God of War games as a service game, which means essentially it's a Fortnite, season pass, microtransactions, the works. How God of War was going to be transitioned into a games as a service game, who knows? Maybe like a MOBA or something I can see as a possibility. I don't know. I can't see it as anything particularly faithful to the original games, or God of War Ragnarok. They tried making a multiplayer God of War game with Ascension at one point that was a complete bomb. They clearly were trying to utilize their IP into making a game as a service that would work. It's very interesting because they also shut down The Last of Us games as a service game a while back. And that's another one that I was like, if you're going to make it, like, what are your biggest IP? Like, what are Sony's biggest IP that are like guaranteed to sell no matter what? God of War and The Last of Us. Like, I think those are their 2 big ones. And the fact that they shut both of them down before they even came out is telling. It's telling. Next thing is Bend. We'll get back to that in a second. But Bend, obviously the people who made Days Gone, Siphon Filter, a long time ago, they had been shot down a long time ago into making a Days Gone sequel. Days Gone famously was reviewed mid as frick, but sold incredibly well. And nobody seems to know that. Anything with zombies in it typically sells incredibly well. Days Gone was a massive commercial success, but critically it was not. And you don't see many people kind of crying from the rooftops about Days Gone. But Bend wanted to make another game, and this is a studio that's been pushed around in a million different directions. I mean, they at one point were a Vita studio for PlayStation. Obviously, they started off making games like Siphon Filter, which is an old classic from them that they haven't done anything with in years, and pushed them to making Vita titles. And then they also, at a time, were like a PlayStation 2 port house. So they were porting games from the PSP to the PlayStation. And then obviously they made Days Gone, so they went back to making console games. And then they wanted to make the sequel, and then they were like told, no, you're going to be making a games as a service game. We don't know what the game was, but they were told they're going to make another games as a service game. Here is what it all boils down to, is opportunity cost. And I think that is most evident with Bluepoint. So Bluepoint was recently purchased by Sony, and I think well known for their remakes. Like Demon Souls obviously is the big one that everybody points to. They remade Demon Souls for the PlayStation 5. They've made a couple of other games. They make these big, kind of upscaled, remade, redone ports, essentially, of older, more successful games. And it seemed like that was kind of their resume when Sony picked them up, and it seemed like that was clearly what Sony was going to be buying them for, was always producing a remake of a really popular game that they had already made. Bloodborne was the obvious answer. I think we've heard kind of tellings of like From Software essentially is like, don't ever frickin' touch that unless we do it. Like, we will not don't ever do anything with Bloodborne unless we give the say so. Like, they hold the keys to that franchise essentially. And even though Sony owns it, like, they don't. From Software is not a company that you really want to piss off in that way. But I think Bluepoint was brought in for that, and why not make them make like remake the original God of War next, from the ground up, or why don't you remake the original Ratchet and Clank, or something like that, and it doesn't have to be a game from the PlayStation 2 necessarily, but why not remake Resistance? The original Resistance, a PlayStation 3 game, which that was like Demon Souls was a PlayStation 3 game. So it's like, why not make these, put a lot of effort into these games, and we can revitalize these IP, and you already have a blueprint to work with. So like, it just seems like a no-brainer. And like, these games typically sell very well because they were already based on games that were already successful. So it's like, it just makes sense. It just seems like an easy win. And then you give them the task of a God of War games as a service game. And you're like, what the frick? Like, this is nothing like what this company, what the studio is really built for. Like, that just seems so out of left field. Not only that, but like, you could have had them working on something a lot more consequential that people would have wanted for years, like for a long time now. It just seems like you will never get that time back. And it just means that both of these studios, which are studios that probably could have been making some game that a lot of people would have cared about, have been working on these games as a service games that nobody is ever going to see for the past good long while. And it means that those games that they could have been making in the meantime will never be made, and we'll have this huge gap of a Sony catalog where Sony already isn't really releasing a lot, comparative to like Nintendo and Microsoft's catalog, which typically is pushing out something interesting every few months. Like, Sony really doesn't do that. They'll push out maybe a game a year, and a lot of this whole generation has kind of been lost to that. This games as a service push where most of their studios are clearly working on these games as a service games. Like, we haven't seen any real, like, Insomniac has like produced like 5 different games that have basically carried the entire generation. Like, there's been really no need to own a PlayStation 5 outside of that. Which, I mean, they're all great games, don't get me wrong, but like, none of their other studios have really been producing anything of note. This is clearly a reaction to Concord failing miserably. They obviously went back through, looked at all of their games as a service games that were still out there, and said, yeah, Concord didn't work, this isn't going to work either, and cut their losses. Here's the big takeaway that like kind of made me put this into perspective and made me go like, wow, okay, this is clearly this did not work out. This whole games as a service initiative by Sony is that 8 of the 12 games as a service game that Sony initially was developing have been canceled. 8 of 12, 3/4, 75% of them have been canceled. Who knows? We may see the other 4 die soon too. Who knows? Herman Holst went out and not Herman Holst, he's the current CEO. Jim Ryan went out And he started this initiative a while back and said, we need a games as a service game. Helldivers 2 did really great. They lucked out there. I think they really lucked out there. But they said, we need more of these guys. Obviously, before Helldivers 2 came out, they said that. But they said, we need more of these guys. These are going to be our moneymaker. We need at least one. We just need one to hit. And then we will be rolling in the dough. And they pretty much put like a vast majority of their resources into making these games. And it seems to have not really paid off in a lot of ways. And I think it's really messed up this generation. I think it doesn't matter because you have a floundering Microsoft who's really just given up in terms of being a console provider, and not a floundering Nintendo, but like, I mean, if you're going to play games like a hardcore gamer, you're not going to play it on the Switch. Like, you're really the only thing you're going to be playing on the Switch is a Nintendo title. That's literally it. And that shows in their sales as well. It's like 80% of sales is Nintendo IP on the Switch. It's like 20%. I think maybe even higher. But like, nobody's playing the Switch for anything other than Nintendo games exclusively. So Sony still has this lock on pretty much everything else. But like, I think we've really, as gamers who were looking forward to Sony IP when buying a PS5, have really been let down. I think it's because of this. And I think that, like, even if these games came out, we'd still have 8 games as a service games, I guess. But like, this clearly has just not been an initiative that has worked wonders for them and is nothing spectacular. And I think we're going to see probably more of those 4 that are still alive be canceled. And maybe one of them will stick. Maybe not. But I think this is a real unfortunate situation. Specifically, Blue Point is what I'm sad about. Would have loved to see what they were working on other than the games as a service game. And then Bend, I don't think is that big of a loss because, I mean, like, again, what have they made recently that anybody cares about? I mean, Days Gone, obviously, people played, but like, I don't think anybody cares about Days Gone. So like, maybe not. It could have been something cool from them, but unfortunate situation all around. In conjunction with that, there's a couple of other Sony tidbits that I did want to acknowledge. That's obviously the big one, but this is a big one too, but there's just not much to say, which is the new Sony Interactive president has been put into place, which is Hideki Nishino, who's, a business dude, moved up, and he's been promoted to the president of Sony Interactive Entertainment. Herman Holst was there, but he's been essentially put on the COO position, more or less. He's the lead of the studio business group, so he'll be running the studios, and he'll be reporting to Nishino. Obviously, it's always a big deal when anybody is put into a presidency at a company, is going to be running the ship. You're hoping for the best here. Really, Nishino's just been kind of a business guy for a long time, so he's going to keep being a business guy. I don't see any like Herman Holst was an interesting pick, and I would have been interested to see what he was going to do with that kind of power. He's still going to have a huge influence, no doubt, but like, this is a more safe pick, a more understandable pick in my personal opinion. And obviously Hiroki Totoki going to be just the COO the CEO of just Sony. You're going to go back to doing that. So he was just an interim president at the time. But obviously a big deal there. And then another big deal, Insomniac Games' Ted Price retires after 30 years. So if you don't know, Insomniac, obviously Ratchet & Clank, Spider-Man, a lot of really big, honestly a very prolific developer, one of, I think, Sony's most impactful. I think it is their like best studio right now, just based on output. They're just putting out a game every year and a half. It's like crazy. But they've been around for a really long time, really, really long time, and they've produced a lot of games that I really enjoy. Ted Price has been there for the vast majority of it, if not all of it, I think. And finally retires after 30 years. I think this dude is doing fine. He obviously got a huge payout when they sold to Sony. This guy didn't. This probably just was him, it was probably a contractual obligation to stick around for a certain amount of time after selling to Sony, and then once he hit that, he was like, "Yeah, I have enough to freaking retire for many, many years and live a nice life." But I never met him, but I have seen him. The one time I went to E3, I went and I saw the in-house Spider-Man 1 not press conference, but like demo. There was an in-person demo. And Ted Price was actually at the booth, and he was just talking to people, and he just seemed like a nice guy. Like that's my one interaction with Ted Price. I'm honestly lucky to have any interactions with him at all. But I took a picture of him with my phone from a distance because I was in line waiting for the demo to start because they let him. It was like a show, They would play it hands on and like let you watch. I was in line. I was like, I don't want to lose my place in line because I think I had to get like a reservation too at that time. Like they were testing out a reservation system that year at E3. So like I didn't want to lose my place in line, and like Ted Price was like right there, like next to the booth, and I was like, oh dude, that's freaking cool. There's Ted Price. I know who that is. But he will be replaced with a 3 CEO system, or 3 co-studio heads. That's Chad Dezern, Ryan Schneider, and Jin Huang. It's an interesting situation there with the three-tiered CEOs. Most of the time you just have one, and then just other dudes report to you who have different specialties. This is a weird situation in which like each one of these guys has a different background. One guy is a business guy, one guy's a marketing guy, and one guy is like a developer. So like each one of them, or he's like an old school developer that kind of has worked his way up the ranks. So he's like a technical guy. So like all these guys have their own disciplines and probably their own perspectives. And normally you would just put the business guy up front because he's the business guy running the business. And then like you would have the marketing guy be like a COO or a COM of marketing. And then like, the technical guy be like a CIO or something like that. And that would be, that would be everything you need. They'd all report to him. But in this case, they'll probably be butting heads. I don't know why they decided to do this. I'd love to hear the rationale. I don't necessarily foresee this doing anything negative to Insomniac, as long as they continue to run the place as well as they have been. But it's an interesting decision nonetheless. But a lot of different stuff, I guess, happening over at Sony. Obviously some good stuff and some bad stuff, some turnover and some new faces to help lead the company. Overall, Sony's still doing fine. It's unfortunate, but that we're losing these people or whatever the case is in, whatever situation, but and these games have been canceled instead of, like something I actually wanted to play coming out. But at the end of the day, I really think Sony's going to continue piloting the ship pretty well. I don't think anything horrible is going to happen here. I think you don't have a reason to worry about Sony, at least at this current moment. It's just interesting to see all of these decisions coming out, and like clearly there have been problems there. So yeah, that's more or less all I have to say on that. Next, I have a couple smaller items I was just going to throw in here real quick before we get to the meat and potatoes of the episode. So first one is an analyst came out and said that GTA could cost $100. Like essentially it's, people will pay for it, so why not? I think it was a little taken out of context. They weren't saying it should or anything. It was just like if it did, that would be really cool for like money reasons. I think I think what's going to happen here is it's probably going to still cost $100. It will be the deluxe edition that costs $100. So, not that big of a news story there. But then GTA pre-orders, also analysts saying could bring in $1 billion with a B, $1 billion just in pre-orders alone. This is a game that is clearly a tour de force. I've said it a million times, and I will continue to say it. This is going to be massive. Like, people are literally saying this is, like, video game industry income has been down for a while. Revenue's been down. It's been on a downward trend. This is what's going to bring it back. Literally, GTA 6 is the reason it's going to come back. And and like be profitable. Is everybody's going to have like a higher, a rising tide raises all boats, and this is the case for sure. I'm not interested in GTA 6, but who knows? Maybe FOMO will get me, and I will play it. Next small little bitsy bit of information here is something I personally feel attacked by, but it is just what it is physical game spend has halved since 2021. This is nothing new. 2021, obviously, that's really like a 4-year, depending on when exactly they're talking 2021, but like 3 to 4 year range, halved, that's a massive drop. That's massive. This is nothing new, though. We don't necessarily see this as like a surprise. Everybody knows physical game sales has been trending on a downward spiral, and I think a lot of that has to do with if you're including microtransactions, which is probably where the majority of spend in the video game industry has come from. Most people are going to be putting their money into digital in terms of that, but in terms of literally just physical spend down 50%, I think it's just like we're just a dying breed. I think it's, I think physical games are turning into a collectibles hobby. That's what it is. That's really literally all it is we're getting into a collector's market with physical. So if you're a physical guy like me, it's really unfortunate because I do think it's economically understandable. Like I just went to GameStop this week and traded in like 3 games, and got like $90 because I'm a savvy shopper. I turned in some like games that I had gotten for Christmas. I'd beaten pretty quick, and they had like a 20% extra trade-in credit. So I ended up getting a pretty good deal for all of them. But like I can't do that with digital games. I can't do that. Not only that, I also actually like having a physical game collection. It's actually like something I love looking. They're like almost like trophies, Like I like looking at the wall and being like, oh yeah, I like that game. Astrobot. I'm literally looking at my wall right now. Oh, I had fun with that. Red Dead Redemption 2. Ooh, that's a good one. What's another one? I'm just looking at my wall right now. Sakura Wars. Don't judge me. Like that kind of stuff. Like I think that's cool. I think that brings back memories just by me like looking at it, and it feels like almost like an accomplishment that I get to hold on to that and look at it, and it's tangible. Maybe that's an old school mentality, but it is a mentality that I was raised with and is sticking with me at the time. So it's unfortunate. Like I am a dying breed, but there's always limited run games, which is has its problems, but at the same time, we will just be a niche market moving forward. So halved in the past 3 to 4 years, physical game spend, unfortunate. Now, let's get into what I was just referring to as the meat and potatoes of the episode. So we're going to start off with a news topic, and we're going to transition into impressions here because we're going to be talking about EA, specifically Dragon Age the Veilguard, the long-awaited, depending on who you ask, I guess, the long-in-development sequel to Dragon Age Inquisition, which was the best-selling game of its year, won many Game of the Year awards, and is from a prolific studio known as Bioware Studios, who are best known for Mass Effect and Dragon Age. And, of course, Anthem, too. The colossal failure, which was like the first big live service, high-profile game that like completely flopped. Now we're just looking at like them every other week with games like Concord, but like that was way back in the day, the big one. But I played Dragon Age the Veilguard recently. I actually was really trying to push it into my Game of the Year list. I was like, oh, like I may really love this game because I really love Dragon Age. So like I want to get through this game so I can make sure I can possibly add it to my Game of the Year episode if I like it. And we'll get into the impressions in a bit, but I don't want to spoil it too much. But EA loses $6 billion in value after Football Club 2025 and Dragon Age the Veilguard underperform. $6 billion in value, I believe, was 16% of their total shares, which is, that's a lot. 16% of your stock getting wiped out on one earnings call is, and $6 billion in value, obviously, $6 billion is more understandable for most people. You hear billion and you hear lose, and you're like, uh-oh. EA is still doing fine, okay? Even a 16% loss in their stock. EA is like Fortune 500, like I would say one of the most well-run video game companies out there right now because of games like EA Sports Football Club, which I think is just abbreviated to FC. I don't play sports games, so I don't know. But here's the thing. A lot of people reactionarily are being like, ooh, it's Dragon Age. Dragon Age made EA fail. Woke go broke. And that is not the case here. So did Dragon Age underperform? Absolutely. The vast majority of why investors are freaking out and selling their stock over this is because EA Sports Club or EA Sports Football Club is actually the problem. So during the Christmas season, in-game purchases were down much more than what they essentially assumed it would be. It's really hard for me to understand that because, I mean, this was one of the best-selling games of the year. I think it is one of the top 5. I think it's like number 5 best-selling games of 2024. So, like, it doesn't make sense why you wouldn't have made any money off of microtransactions. And I think it's not that it necessarily didn't make any money off of microtransactions. It just, it didn't make as much as EA was expecting to make. So that's where the vast majority of this loss came from. They've already said that they're kind of going to try to reshape some things in that game to try and boost that spending, but like that's where EA is making the vast majority of its money now, is on these live service games. Specifically, I believe it's the Ultimate Team mode. So it's essentially like fantasy football, if you've ever heard of that. You get to choose like whatever players you want from any team, and you get to put them in your team and play with them. And the thing about it is you have to randomly unlock them, kind of like trading cards. You have to randomly unlock, these soccer players, and then you can put them into your team. So it's essentially making money off of gambling, because that is, of course, like the best way to make money in any way, shape, or form is just to hook people on gambling practices and make them spend hundreds of dollars on a game that shouldn't be hundreds of dollars and should just be for fun. But, that's just the world we live in now. Dragon Age, if we want to specifically hit on this, Dragon Age reached, and I put that in emphasis, reached is the word they used, 1.5 million players. This was 50% below their estimates in the first quarter of release is the specific time that they're measuring here. So they were expecting about a 3 million player base, and they got 1.5. Reached is very telling because I played Dragon Age in quarter 1 of its release, and I didn't buy it. I bought it secondhand. So I got I got it on a deal at GameStop on Black Friday, buy 2 get 1 pre-owned. So a pretty good deal there, and then like some other deals on top of that for Black Friday. So I got it for like $30 or something like that. And I didn't give a single penny of that to EA. Like all that went to GameStop because I bought it secondhand. But I'm considered reached because I played the game. I have trophies for the game. Like I got to the end of it. So like I am considered reached. EA Play is considered reached, which I don't know how successful EA Play is. Like I don't know how many subscribers EA Play is. If you don't know what EA Play is essentially EA's Game Pass. You pay a monthly subscription and you get access to all their games day one. In this instance, I would think it's, a few 100,000 maybe, but like not that many. Not anywhere near as big as Game Pass, I would think. Maybe that would engage with Dragon Age via EA Play. But the thing is 1.5 million is probably not the number of sales they're referring to. Is essentially what I'm saying. Is 1.5 is probably sold around 1 million. I would have to think, in probably being generous, and that's still 50% below estimates, which is still drastically lower than what they assumed it would be. So this game didn't sell. At least it sold very poorly comparative to what they were hoping it would, which was a major part of like why they then went on to lower their forecast for the the flops that they had. I think they were considering having they were projecting making like a few percentage points of an increase, and they went and said, okay, yeah, never mind, we're going to just take that back, rewind it a little bit. We're actually expecting a couple points decrease in the next quarter because these games didn't do so well. Again, I think, this is a 75-25 thing. 75% of the problem here is sports club or football club. FC25, I'm just going to call it FC. FC25 is the reason this is a problem. 100% so is Dragon Age, but it's more like a 25% split. Like it's not the big moneymaker. Like the big moneymaker for EA has always been the Ultimate Team modes from these games. That's where they make the vast majority of their money in general. So, a very disappointing thing for them, but not necessarily something EA is like probably sweating over as much as they are the FC25. On top of this news, the Dragon Age director, Corinne Bush, left BioWare after the game's release for a, quote, offer she couldn't turn down. Based on the reception of this game and based on the backlash that this game has garnered, I can't imagine that being the case. I would think that this is going to make her career difficult at any big publisher moving forward. For those of you that aren't aware, Corinne is also transgender. So she was the director of the game, and she was also a transgender woman. So like the reason that comes into play is because this game has gotten significant backlash for its quote unquote woke ideology, which I will get into in my impressions, but I think that's worth noting. And then on top of that, Jason Schreier came out and reported that the studio is now, well, actually, back up a little bit. BioWare made a public announcement and said the studio had downsized after the underperformance of Veilguard. And they said, they quote, said they don't need the full studio support for the next Mass Effect. Do tell. That's interesting, considering clearly, you would think the studio's livelihood is completely based on the next Mass Effect at this point. There's no way, unless the next Mass Effect is this massive grand slam, that you're going to see BioWare around anymore. This studio is going to be shut down 100%. So they say, we don't need everybody. Manpower, who needs it? Just put them on other studios. We don't care. And that was kind of the idea that people had, kind of the way this press release had been, kind of directed was, oh, well, they probably just moved them to other studios. And that was something that did happen. To be fair, is like they were given the opportunity to apply for other studios before they were moved off of the team within EA, and they were going to try to find places for them. Well, then Jason Schreier comes out and he says, oh, well, BioWare is now down to under 100 people. So this is now a super small studio for a massive game like Mass Effect. And a lot of those people that quote unquote were like, they were sent to other studios were actually just fired. Like they were not like, oh yeah, dude, we just put you on frickin' what's another EA game? Battlefield. We'll just put you on the Battlefield team. It's not that big a deal. It's like, nah, dude, like they just fired him. And if they didn't have a place for him, they just let him go, and which is understandable. But like essentially what this means is BioWare is a shell. It is now down to like the underperformance of this game. This game bombed so hard that EA essentially is like, we gave you your chance. Like, we gave you your chance to show that you can make a good game that can make us some money, and you failed. You were not able to succeed in this. So, like, it seems like a ship that nobody wants to be on right now. This is a studio that has obviously, over the course of time, been incredibly mismanaged and utilized in horrible ways. Obviously, like, we look back and say that, Andromeda, I mean, you can honestly start pointing it back to, like, Mass Effect 3, which I actually want to go back and replay to see if it's as bad as people remember it being. But, Mass Effect 3 had a very large controversy around its ending. Then you had, Mass Effect Andromeda, which was not received very well. And then you had, obviously, Anthem. And then Inquisition, which has a very, in that time frame as well, in that time period, which was, given a very mixed reception in terms of, like, it won Game of the Year awards, but I think people look back on that game and think it sucks. I'm kind of one of those people that, like, at the time was like, yeah, this is pretty cool. And then, like, as time progressed, I was like, oh no, like, The Witcher 3 exists. Like, this game sucks, like, which I think is definitely going to come up in the conversation of the Veilguard impressions as well. But this is, like, I think BioWare is dead. I think this is like EA slowly shuffling them under the rug. And, like, this is, EA is known as being this massive studio that takes in people and then completely closes them. They have a long history of acquiring studios that a lot of people really like and shutting them down shortly after when they don't perform as well as they thought they would. And BioWare was really the last bastion for that. It was the one studio that people could point to and say, oh, well, EA doesn't kill absolutely everything it touches. And I think you can, at this point, say, like, they are killing BioWare. Like, this is a knife to the throat of BioWare. They're slowly poisoning their food every day in the hospital when they feed them. Like, this is definitely that kind of a situation. I can't see the next Mass Effect being great after this, just because I don't think they're going to be given the resources they need to make it great. I think that the personnel there is no longer the BioWare we know. Obviously, this studio was tried to turn into, like, a games of a service studio with Anthem, and it didn't work out. And, like, if you read, Jason Schreier has a book that he actually has a whole chapter dedicated to BioWare and specifically Inquisition, the development around Inquisition. And it's always, I love his books. I haven't gotten around to his Activision Blizzard book yet, but I'm really looking forward to reading it. And it's, essentially, like, even when BioWare was successful, they were like, we don't even know what we're doing. Like, it was called the BioWare magic. Like, it was, all their games that came out, they all seemed like they were horrible until, like, the last few months of development where just everything came together magically for them. And, like, I like to think that there was more there at BioWare than just, like, luck. That, like, oh yeah, we just happened to make a really good game. Like, I like to think that there was a lot of studio talent there as well. But I mean, even if there was talent, it's clearly left. When you start making a game that is completely different than what you're used to making, and something that people who got hired onto or took a job at that studio probably wanted to make. Like, if you're making a story-based RPG, single-player experience, and you're like, oh, I love that kind of a game, I want to work there, and then you get there and they're like, oh, well, we're actually making the next Fortnite. It's like, okay, I don't really love that. Like, that's not what I wanted to make. It's like, well, then you're probably going to leave. And because this studio has been in such a tumultuous, long development cycle, there has literally been people who started working on Dragon Age the Veilguard, left, came back, and left again. Like, it's been a long time, and it's been a lot of reason for people to be skeptical that they don't want to be there anymore. And I think a vast majority of the original staff is gone. So what can BioWare produce now? Well, let's get into that with the impressions section, shall we? Because I have played Dragon Age the Veilguard, and so all this news came out, and I was like, perfect. I have an opinion, because a lot of people, this has been an incredibly interesting thing to see, because when I was doing research for this review that I'm about to kind of say in my voice on a podcast, is I didn't realize how much people hated it. Like, there is a real reactionary political conversation around this game, and I knew it existed, but like, I knew there was one around Stellar Blade too, but I didn't think it was that, like, I didn't think people actually gave a frick. You know, I thought it was a minority, you know, it was a vocal minority. And I thought it was the same thing for Dragon Age Veilguard. Like, of course it's a vocal minority. Like, who cares? Bro, if you go to any video that IGN did with Dragon Age Veilguard, they either have ratings disabled, or the like to dislike ratio is like insanely large on the dislike side. Like, just trailers, or like a preview of like them being like, here's the story trailer for Dragon Age Veilguard. Like, it's just like downvoted into affinity, and all the comments are, this is some woke garbage, you know, like, I hate SJWs or something like that. I was like, what the frick is going on? Like, I completely underestimated how much people frickin' hate this thing. And because I'm actually in some circles where people are either lukewarm on it, they're like, yeah, I don't love the political elements of it, or like they actually like the game. And like, so I was like, this game could possibly be really good. Like, I feel like I cannot address this game at all without at some point talking about the political elements of it, and like, what if I think that those are justified or not, because 90% of the time I don't think it is. Like, I think gamers just love to freaking complain about this bull crap. You know, I don't care if I have to play as a woman, you know, as long as, you know, I'll play as Lara Croft. Like, I don't give a frick, you know, like, it's fine. It's just a matter of if you actually did it well or not. I mean, whether it's a political statement or not, I mean, I don't give a frick as long as it's done well, you know? And 90% of the time, it's not even really trying to be a political statement. It's just trying to be there. So, like, it doesn't matter to me. In this instance, I think that's a little bit different. And clearly people thought so as well. And I feel like I have to touch on that. This is obviously a very tumultuous development cycle. This is a 10-year development window for this. Technically, game was only in production for like 4 years, but like, this game obviously went through a time where it probably was considered for like being a games as a service game. I think it was considered as a games of a service game, and then it was turned into a single player game after Anthem bombed so significantly. I think combat has been something that's been all over the place. I think at one point this was considered like a quote-unquote God of War style combat engine, and like, I think you still see a lot of influence from that. Like, a lot of that still carried over, no doubt. But you know, like, and then you had the, you know, Inquisition, which was this, you know, kind of a game that came out and was admittedly came out in a really bad year for games, and then like won a bunch of Game of the Year awards, and then after all that, like a few years later, people look back and was like, that game really sucks. Like, that game's not good. Like, quest design for it was really bad. It's super bloated. Like, I don't care about the story or characters. Like, pretty much everything about that game, people were like, I hate that freaking thing, especially after The Witcher 3 came out, in which it kind of got blown out of the water in just about every way. And eventually this game came out and had mixed reviews. Which I will also get into, because there's more to that than I assumed as well after I started doing research for this. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Because I'll start from the top here. Like I said, this game is incredibly mixed right now, and you'll find some people kind of defending a lot of the decisions that were made in this game, and you'll definitely find a lot of people that, you know, talk bad about it. And I've seen people on both sides of the aisle here give their case, and I'm just going to go ahead and say I lean on the negative here. I will go ahead and say this game is not bad. It is not a bad game, but it is very disappointing. And I say that as a person who, let's get into my backstory with Dragon Age. So Dragon Age was my first Bioware RPG, and I fell in love with it. I loved it. I loved how you could make a bunch of decisions that actually seemed to affect the game and the story and the characters around you. I thought the writing was amazing. Combat for the first one I was a little mixed on, but like I definitely understand why people would like that more tactical element of it. I ended up buying Dragon Age 2 day one, and it's a very different game. And I was definitely disappointed in a lot of elements of it, but like at the end of the day, I still really like Dragon Age 2. I still like the world, I still like the characters, and I still think the story is good, even though it's like kind of focusing on a different thing. It's more focusing on like a smaller scale story than like a grand like save the world story. I obviously played Inquisition as well. I started playing it. I was more so into it for the lore and the story than necessarily anything else. I think it's an incredibly bloated mess with horrific side quest design, like some of the worst side quest design I've ever seen, outside of like some really low standard like JRPGs. It's like those quests are literally like, go find me 10 flowers and bring them back, and then you'll get, like, I would literally take every quest I saw, and then I would go back to people when they were like highlighted as like, you should talk to this person, because I'd finished the quest, and I was like, oh, I didn't even remember that quest. Like I genuinely don't even remember taking this quest. It was so forgettable. I didn't even know that's what I was like doing at the time. Like I guess I just picked up 10 flowers because I was just picking up everything as I went, and I guess that's cool. Like horrific game design or side quest design in that game. I love Mass Effect. Obviously, I have played a little bit of Anthem. I think it's a little overrated on the hype or on the hate, but I think like it's still not a great game. It still functions though. It's not horrific. And then Andromeda, I think, is completely forgettable. Unfortunately, like I really love Mass Effect, but like I think Andromeda is pretty forgettable. So like it's unfortunate there. I think you clearly see like a downward slope in BioWare's kind of ability or games that they've put out over time. But I am very into the Dragon Age universe. I love a lot of the characters because I love that first game so much. I really, really love it from the beginning. And I was really interested in this game because I was like, holy frick, we're finally back. We're finally going to continue the story. We're finally going back to this universe, and we're going to see these characters that I'm so attached to. It's a little disappointing to say the least, but we're going to start off with some of the good because this game starts off good. I think the game's intro is actually pretty strong. It's what you see in the kind of, I think it was Summer Games Fest press conference that they had for Dragon Age, and you're working with Varric and a couple of other characters that you see that you have as party members throughout the game, and you're trying to stop Solus, who is the kind of built up antagonist from Inquisition, and he's trying to break the veil, which if you don't know, it's essentially like the magical barrier. There's a lot of complex lore reasons as to why he wants to do that. I'm not going to get into it here because it's honestly not important to Veilguard at all. But like, the game starts off pretty strong, and you end up having like Solus trapped in your head, and he becomes kind of a recurring character that you interact with in that way as the game goes. Combat starts off good too. It is, like very snappy. Honestly pretty fun. And I've heard a lot of people very strong on the combat as well. What really is interesting about this combat is it has a lot of potential for builds. So like, your skill tree, you can kind of there's no way you can get all the skills on the skill tree throughout the entire game. And a lot of the skills on the skill tree are actually like skills that are like valuable, and like it's not just like 5% attack, it's like, it's actually like, here you can do like a super dodge or something like that, and then you can, super deflect enemies, and time will slow when you do a super dodge and stuff like that. Like it's actual abilities. There's definitely some of that, like 5% attack, like littered in here and there, but most of them are like stuff that actually changes the way that you can play the game. There's also like obviously the gear you have and you pick up throughout the game has a lot of effects that you can add on to it. You can specifically there's like ultimate gear that you can find throughout the game that like will completely change the way your build functions entirely. So like one that I can think of off the top of my head, I used one of them, but like some of them are like crazy. It's like, okay, well when you freeze every enemy that you attack, but then you also freeze yourself when doing so, and then when an enemy hits you, like everybody who is frozen will like explode and take massive damage. And it's like, okay, like you can see a way that you can maybe like tweak your build to like completely function around that piece of gear and like maybe even break some stuff. And I've seen people do that. Like they'll get really creative with their builds within the game and like do some really interesting stuff based on the gear and the skills that they've purchased. And like you can, at any point in the game, you can unbuy certain skills that you've bought and like put them into different stuff, and like so you can essentially respec your character at any time and completely do a different build, which is really cool. And I've seen people get over 100 hours of content out of this game just by doing that. Here's the thing, is that I think the vast majority of people who play this game are not going to do that. I think it's very obvious that that's probably what the developers wanted. They wanted to give the ability for you to get really deep and nitty gritty into like the stats and the bonuses and the abilities and stuff and make some really cool builds. But I think that the vast majority of players are going to find that you don't ever need to do that at any point. It is, like I said, it's kind of God of War inspired. It's very action focused. Visuals are snappy. And like you can put a lot of time into it, but you don't need to do that because the difficulty, I mean, like it's at normal, a lot of the enemies are pretty spongy. Here's where it really goes wrong. So you do have companions. You have this companion wheel like Mass Effect, which I actually really like in Mass Effect. And I actually would bring along people in Mass Effect that would like complement my playstyle because they would have abilities that I wouldn't. In this game, you have like they try to incorporate a quote unquote like tactical element to it, and the tactical element is like some companions will like add a certain effect to an enemy, and then if you combine that with another character's ability, it'll do like massive damage, and that's like easily the most beneficial way of going about using your companion's abilities. There's like no way you wouldn't do that. Like you get AoE effect and you get like a super bonus damage. So like why wouldn't you do that? It's just silly. The problem with this is that all abilities for that companion get put on a cooldown when you do that, when you use any ability that they have. So you essentially knock your companion, like why would you ever use any other ability that mother effer has at any point, because you just need to combine it with the other companion's ability. Like it basically reduces the strategy of like the tactical element of it to like you don't ever really need to do anything but these two moves. You will choose two companions that they have complementing abilities every single time you go into a level, and you'll just do that the entire time. There's no reason to level up anything with a character or a companion that way in any other way. You will get a build that you will, like for your own playable character, you will get a build or you will find a build that is functional and works, and they are typically pretty powerful on their own, and there is no need to ever do anything else. Like I found a build about 10 hours into the game that I was pretty comfortable with, and I never deviated from it, and I never felt the incentive to deviate from it. And a lot of people that I've been reading reviews from are like, I turned the difficulty down about halfway through the game, and I did that too. I was playing on normal, and I knocked it down to easy because I was like, these enemies are just bullet sponges, or I guess in this case, sword sponges. They are absolute, like, they have way too much health, they take way too long to kill, and it makes combat drag on for too long when it really just boils down to button mash with your pretty basic abilities, and then wait for these cooldowns to finish so you can continue to spam these like combo attacks that do massive damage. And I about even further in the game, I actually knocked the difficulty down to even further to story, because I was like, I don't care about the combat at all at this point. I only care about just seeing the game through the end. And it probably saved me about 10 hours overall in the game in terms of runtime. It took me 50 hours to beat this game, which is pretty freaking long considering what is in this game. But like, I can't say that anything in this game's combat is revolutionary. I would say that I was probably enjoying it for those first 10 hours when I was building out a character and experimenting with builds and finding new abilities and stuff like that. But like once I got a rhythm down, like it was unnecessary for me to do literally anything else with the combat. I would highly recommend either starting the game off easy or like knocking it down after a certain point, because it really is just a waste of your time. Next is, I guess, touching on those characters. Characters are good. Bioware is known for, having really good characters. That's like kind of really the strength of their games, is having companions that you really like hanging around and using in combat, and specifically a lot of their loyalty missions. Most Bioware games have like a loyalty mission that you do for Mass Effect 2 really popularized that you do to really increase your bond with them, and maybe like they have like a side story that they're dealing with and you have to help them out. The characters here are good. I would not say it is the best Bioware cast, and I think where it really falls flat is like none of these characters have any kind of like significance in the world or like impact in the story. Like in the original Dragon Age, you have Altair, who's like literally the prince of the kingdom, and you eventually have to decide whether he becomes king or not, which is like a major in-game decision. You have Morrigan, who is like the daughter of this all-powerful witch that like is kind of controlling of a lot of things behind the scenes. You have Liliana, who is this she's like the master of assassins, so she helps run an assassination guild that like kills a bunch of people, like that helps, again, run things in the shadows. You have several characters, like in Mass Effect, you have Solus is an obvious one that comes up. He's like responsible for creating the genophage, which is a disease that like wipes out basically an entire race in the entire universe. Like these are like characters that are not only complex and interesting, but also have a major role within the world you're in, and nobody in Veilguard has that, like, at all. Like they're all pretty like these one-note characters that like have, like, I'm an elf who also likes to tinker with things, and it's like, okay. I am a Grey Warden who likes griffins. It's like, okay. It's like I'm an assassin who's one of the assassins in this guild of assassins. It's like, okay, these are all fine. Like they're fine and they're well executed for what they are, but like they are not these like major players that you're used to in these games, and it feels like it throughout the majority of the game, unfortunately. Loyalty quests for these guys are also like not only here, but they are a major part of the game. Specifically, at one point, like the game directly tells you, like it sits you down. All the characters are like, "Look, we have problems that we need to finish, and if we don't, we won't be able to save the world." It's like, okay, I guess we're doing loyalty quests now, and that's literally what you do. Is like at the end of the game just stops you and is like, "You do the loyalty quests now, like do them all." So it kind of wrecks the game's pacing for a large part of it there. I also had a favorite character in the game that was an assassin, like I mentioned, and like I felt like his arc was like entirely not handled super well. Like his big twist is that he's possessed by a demon, He gets captured and he has to like make a pact with a demon to get out of prison, and like it seems like that's supposed to be like the culminating arc for him, is like he's going to try to get rid of the demon and like handle that, and it never does. It's just completely dropped for like him like trying to get revenge on somebody who effed him over in the guild, his assassins guild. So you know, like I never hated the cast in this game, but I never loved them either. Like I also found it really difficult to figure out who I was going to romance in the game, which is normally like not a problem for me in these games at all. And like that's not because like I was like torn, it's because I just didn't care that much about any of these people. Romance is pretty low stakes in this game in general. You pretty much just choose the I love you button every time it comes up, and they will love you back. You know, which is not necessarily uncommon for games nowadays, but you know, there's in a Bioware game, you're just kind of expecting more. Side quests, touching on those. These are 100% better than Inquisition. Like I said, Inquisition is like, I'm going to go collect 10 flowers and come back. I'm going to kill 10 darkspawn and come back. You know, like it's horrific. So you really could not have been worse than Inquisition in terms of side quest design. But like the vast majority of these side quests are skippable. Like unless it is a like companion quest, it is, which is I would say is not a side quest. It is a major part of the game. I would say like the actual side quests, which are side quests, are totally skippable. I can't think of maybe one side quest that was somewhat memorable out of all of them. Most of them boil down to go to this place, kill this stuff, come back, and like, or get this thing, come back. And it's not cool. It's not fun. I still did the vast majority of them hoping for something. Again, it was pretty streamlined, pretty turn off your brain, just like do this and get it and come back. So like, you know, it was kind of like almost like a Ubisoft collectathon in a way. But like the vast majority of these are not, I mean, it's improved from the previous game, but gosh darn, it's still annoying as frick. Or it's still really unfortunate because you have games like The Witcher 3 and Baldur's Gate 3 that have completely, you know, reversed the script on what people expect from these games, having side quests that are actually good. And like that just, it does not meet those expectations. Writing, I found this is a huge part for Bioware games. Writing, obviously, it's known for its story and characters. So how's the writing? Writing is okay. I see a lot of people really harping on this. I've seen people say it seems like HR is in the room the entire time, and I think the writing seems stale, or not stale, sterile. I think it seems neutered. It does seem like it is really never trying to offend anybody. I think it's an exaggeration to say HR is in the room over the whole time, but I think it is always trying to be safe and never trying to put the player in a corner and be, you know, different. I've seen some people say like the original Dragon Age was a really dark game, and this game is definitely not. Like it's very PG, and I think that kind of adds to that. On top of that, like choices in this game, I think choices, like I mentioned in the original Dragon Age, are like a big component. You know, like having this big impact in the world is something that's, I think, very memorable for these games and makes the player feel like they're doing something useful. And I think in this case, there are no choices. This is not a choice-based game at all. There are two choices, only two, in the entire game. And I don't even think that either one of them are like that big of a deal. Obviously, the end game choice, you have a choice. I didn't really care about it that much at that point in the game, which I'll get to in a minute. But like at one point about halfway through the game, you essentially have the ability to choose, do you want to save this city or this city? And if you choose whichever city you choose, it's fine. But the other city essentially gets swallowed up by the blight. and you have to go back to that city, and like it's kind of effed up and it's like covered in blight stuff, and it's a pretty big change. To be fair, it does not change the story at all. It does not change the characters at all. In fact, depending on that, it will make one of your teammates hardened because they like that city, they're like from that city. So they'll be like, I don't like you anymore if you choose that. And it'll even tell you, it'll be like, well, there's actually a consequence to them not liking you. It's like, well, the benefit is their attack will be increased because they'll be angry and hit things harder because of it. But they will also be slower to level up in your relationship, which is also just how they level up. If they level up in your relationship, it's the same thing. So like, it's like a pretty big disadvantage. And like, the person who I chose to like piss off, like I never really noticed. I mean, like I used them in my party all the time, and they were still like one of the highest leveled characters in the game by the end of it. So like I did not see a big change, and like the increase is like a 5% increase on like some minor abilities that they have that you probably will hardly ever use. So it's like not that big a deal. So like pissing off your companions is something that I was genuinely scared of in Dragon Age, and like you will likely do that at some point unless you're like buying gifts for them all the time, which is technically a way to break that system. Really, this whole conversation just makes me want to go back and play Dragon Age Origins. But like, like it. You can't really piss off your teammates ever. It seems like a very shallow system that like is just there to say, yeah, we're Bioware. Don't you remember we can do that? And then so you have two choices. You like in Dragon Age 1, you had choices every 5 seconds that seemed like you were doing something. You don't even have that in this game. And then obviously the end game decision as well, which like they don't really have to commit to because like it's. You're not building off of anything, and they can always just make the next game like completely different anyway. So it's like, who cares? So like very disappointing to say the least. Speaking of which, Solus is a really good character. In this game, I'd say he's easily the standout character, and it again is very disappointing. And this is coming from, and I can tell you why, this is coming from a guy who did not even like Solus in Inquisition. Like, I thought he was a boring companion, that I was like, he was kind of like an a-hole, and I was like, I don't really care about him, and I kind of put him in the back, and I never talked to him, and at the end of the game, like, he becomes like a really big deal, and you find out he has like a massive backstory that's a big impact on the entire universe, and like, he's actually really well taken care of in this game in terms of their side quests that you can do that are directly telling you about Solus's backstory and like why he is the way he is, and like you talk with Solus throughout the game during pivotal moments, and he like kind of helps you make like decisions throughout the game. And this is all fun and good except for the game obviously wanted to make him the main villain. This game was originally called Dreadwolf, Dragon Age Dreadwolf, which is the pseudonym, the pen name per se for Solus in his previous life. He was like a rebellious god of the elves who like kind of led a rebellion against other gods, and he is completely sidelined here. After the beginning of the game, essentially 2 other like generic stupid villains come out and are just like, we're the main focus now. Solus is going to be put on the back burner, and you're going to be fighting us the entire game. And this sucks. It's so clear that Solus could have been a really compelling part of this game and a really awesome villain, and you end up fighting these 2 like generic like mustache twirling, I am evil, like I'm going to make demons take over the world bad guys, which is just like it's so mind-numbing. Like, it's just like, how did they decide to make this decision? I just don't know how they thought that was a good idea, and it's a real shame that Solus is put on a back burner when like a guy who didn't even like him, like me, thought that he was a cool character by the end of this game, and like he's hardly even in it, which is part of the overall problem with this game, is that it seems to be shying away from previous games' lore and choices. So this is almost seems like it's trying to be like a reboot. And I think it's kind of been fashioned as that, as like a soft reboot for the Dragon Age franchise. And I think it's obviously throughout the game, you don't see a lot of recurring characters. You don't see a lot of like, oh, your choice from a previous game, transferred over to this one. And like, you can actually at the beginning of the game choose the choices that like will make an impact from the previous games into this one. And it's 2. And most of them, the 2 that are given to you are like not even that interesting and don't actually hold any significant impact to this game story. And that's if the Inquisition was disbanded at the end of Inquisition, which I did not see any notable significance to that throughout my playthrough. And if the Inquisitor was like still friends with Solus at the end of the game, which like again didn't really matter, even though the Inquisitioner is in this game, but you can't like port your file over or anything for it. So like I just had some random looking Inquisitioner as my freaking Inquisitor. But anyway, there's really very few story connection or character connections to this game from other games. Morrigan is in it. She does not play a major role, or at least not a significant role. Like she could have easily been replaced with another character. I don't recall any other characters other than Morgan and the Inquisitor that really are brought back from previous games at all. And like I said, decisions don't carry over at all. This seems like they did not want to scare people away with like, well, you need to play Dragon Age 1, 2, and Inquisition in order to understand what the frick is happening. Like even though it's a quote unquote direct sequel to Inquisition, it's clearly like not trying to be at all. And so like it ends up feeling really scared. And like as a player who is really into this universe and really into how my decisions help shape it, I don't feel like that happened here at all. With the story, there is a late game twist that feels half-hearted and honestly like lessened the impact of most of the situations in the game. I'm not going to say what it is. It's a pretty big spoiler, but like at the same time, I think when it happened, I was like, yeah, I get that. Like I understand why you did that. And like I could have told you like that was a thing that happened because of the way the game does some certain things. But like at the end of the day, like I really freaking thought this plot twist, I was like, well, now I just feel like this game sucks even more because of it. A lot of people talk really highly about the finale. They're like, oh, well, the game really sucks up into the finale. And then like I beat the finale and I was like, yo, this game was actually like, it could have been really cool if everything was like the finale. And the finale is basically like the suicide mission of Dragon Age, or not Dragon Age, of Mass Effect 2. You're basically going on this epic romp through like this like near death scenario, and like you're having to make choices that lead to like some party members dying or some party members surviving. So like at the end of the game, you can have it so that everybody dies. Literally everybody, including you and all of your teammates. They can possibly die if you didn't do all of their, like companion quests and like you make the wrong decisions. Literally everybody can freaking die in the final mission. And so they're like, oh, it's this action, it's this romp and it's really cool. And, like you can make these decisions and it's really awesome. And I'm not going to lie. By the time I got to the end of this game, I was freaking over it. Like, I was so ready to be done. I was like, I got to get on to something else. I had been playing for 50 hours, and I had gotten sick of the combat and sick of the side quests, and, like, I was not super into the characters, and I was not super into the story for, like, 30 hours up to that point. Like, I kind of checked out of the game about halfway through it. And I was just kind of waiting for something good to happen, and it never really did. And that's why, like, I was just like, I don't care. Like, I really don't care about this finale. And it also, there is a character has to die. Like, you're like, at one point you're told, like, okay, like, we need to send one of these characters out to go scouting. and like they're gonna lead a second party to go scouting, and no matter what character you choose, that character will die, no matter what. And I always felt like that was kind of a jip. It's like, why, like in Mass Effect 2, like you can save everybody. It's not easy, but you can save literally freaking everybody. And like there's a possibility you can do that. And in Veilguard, there's a character that will have to die based on a decision that you make that seems inconsequential to the whole, so like it really kind of pissed me off because I was looking at a walkthrough. I was like, could I have saved them? And they were like, nope, they had to die. And I was just like, okay, cool. Like, this game is really annoying that's what they tried to do. Outside of that, the final game decisions that like you're trying to like that you have to make to like save or like let people die are like pretty self-explanatory. It's like, well, we need somebody to go fight this big thing, this big dragon. And it's like, okay, well, we have a literal person who's a dragon fighter on our party, so probably choose them. Like that kind of a deal. So like it's really not that big of a deal, and like why I was like not very impressed by the finale at all. At the end of the day, I think this game was incredibly hurt by the comparisons with Baldur's Gate. I think companions, writing, side quest design, story, like choices, everything that you would typically consider a Bioware thing was done in 110 times better in Baldur's Gate 3. Like 110 times better. It's kind of impossible to not compare these two. Not only that, but Dragon Age was actually based on Baldur's Gate. So, but if you didn't know, BioWare was started by ex people who used to make Baldur's Gate. So they split off after Baldur's Gate 2, and they started, or one of the expansions, I can't remember, and they made Dragon Age because they did not own the rights to Baldur's Gate. And so like Dragon Age was supposed to be very similar to Baldur's Gate in a lot of ways. And like here we are, Baldur's Gate 3 comes out, and it's like 110 times better than Dragon Age is. And it's really, I think it's impossible to look at the two, not only because of their historical comparison, but because literally they're trying to do very similar things in a lot of ways. And it's very obvious that did not pan out here. So I think like it's unfortunate that this game has to be compared to Baldur's Gate 3, which is one of the greatest games ever made. But at the same time, it kind of has to be. It kind of has to be, unfortunately. So that's kind of the big stuff in terms of the game. I know that's a lot, but I feel like all of it kind of overlaps into each other, obviously. But like it all has to be tackled to kind of show that everything as a whole is somewhat underwhelming. And before we kind of jump to the final statement here, I think I have to approach the wokeness conversation, the political element around this, and kind of give an opinion on that, because as I stated earlier, the director of this game was a trans woman. Writers for this game were non-binary, which is going to be relevant in just a second. And, there are strong elements of that here throughout. So, like, the first thing I ever heard about this game, outside of its, like, initial reveal and stuff, was, like, the character creator, you could make a character with trans surgery scars. So, like, like, if you're a female transitioning to male, you can have your breasts removed and, like, to look more masculine. And so in this game, there is a toggle in the character creator where you can have that turned on, and you can have scars from a surgery for that. And a lot of people were like, what the frick is this doing in this game? Like, this is dumb. Like, in a world filled with magic, you would just have your boobs like poofed. Like, you would just wave a magic wand and get your boobs removed. Like, you wouldn't have to have a surgery. And I was like, I just don't give a frick. Like, I was like, this is such a shallow criticism. It's like, this is optional. Who cares? Like, I could not care less. I'm just not going to toggle it because I don't want a character that's a trans character. I don't want to play as a trans character, so I'm just not going to toggle it, and I'll be happy. And you know what? If somebody else wants to toggle it on and they want to play as a trans character, more power frickin' to them. Let them frickin' do it. And it does not hurt me. It does not pervade. It does not shove it in my face or anything like that. In all honesty, when I was going through the character creator, which I didn't even really engage with super heavily. Normally I don't do that. I kind of just go with basic settings for the most part. Minus a few, the hair and the eyes or something like that. Maybe I'll alter that a little bit because you just see that so much. But I didn't even know that was an option. If you had not told me that, I would not have known, because I was not looking that seriously. And then later the game came out and there was oh, well, there's this non-binary character that's one of your companions, and it's freaking stupid and everybody hates it and blah, 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 it's so annoying. I hate it so much, blah, 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 blah. And I was well, I don't know anything about that. Maybe it's bad. I don't know. I haven't seen it. And, I think, I saw a clip of it at some point, and it was the character essentially being I'm non-binary. Isn't that cool? Or something like that. And I was this just doesn't seem that big of a deal. Again, as it depends on how it's handled, but literally just a character saying I'm non-binary, I don't give a frick about. I really could not care about. Ellie from The Last of Us is gay, and I initially thought she was a straight character until the DLC came out and you were oh, she's gay. And I was it does not change anything. Ellie was still a cool character in The Last of Us. I don't give a frick if she's gay. That's the same thing with frickin' being non-binary. If you're non-binary, who gives a frick? I don't care. As long as you're a cool character, I don't care if that's what you identify as. It doesn't change anything. So, I didn't care. And as Tosh is the main character that we're focusing on here. So she's a Quinari. So that's a warrior race within the Dragon Age universe. They're very traditional and very rigid in their theology of beating the frick out of things. But she is the non-binary character of choice. Also, just a side note, quickly, they really don't know what the frick to do with the Quinari, because the Quinari look frickin' stupid in this game. They have never known what to do. Literally in the first game, Quinari are just random, they're just random looking dudes. They just look like random dudes, average dudes. They don't even look like a mystical magical creature. And then I think it was 2. I think it was 2, they were nah, now they're a weird, they have horns. And I think in 3 they were now they're really alien looking things, orcs. And then in this game they're okay, yeah, they look a little neutered. And they have no idea what the frick to do with Quinari. But anyway, you meet her, and I didn't care. She didn't seem that interesting up front. Whatever. A lot of these characters don't. As you progress down her quests, it becomes obvious this is a coming-of-age story, or not a coming-of-age, it's a finding yourself story, where Tosh is I feel like I'm not a woman, I feel like I'm not a man, I don't know what the frick to do here, and I'm just trying to figure it out. And honestly, I didn't really mind that. I really didn't give a frick about it. Throughout the course of the dialogue with her, I really just saw this as I'm discovering who I am. It didn't really shove it in my face too much. It was more her just kind of coming to terms with who she was, which people do in stories all the time. That's not that big of a deal to me. I see it I see it in every story I've ever seen from these kind of games. People, what should I do? Should I be a knight for the queen, or should I fight for my honor as a rebel in against her, or something like that? People do it all the time. It's not that big of a shake up here. It's just now we're just talking about identity in terms of sexuality or whatever, gender or whatever the frick. So it's I didn't really mind it. I really thought it was fine. And then the dinner scene happened. So towards the end of Tosh's companion quest, a big character in her quest is her mom, who's a very traditional, like, logical Konari. And you literally invite her mom to dinner, and you sit down at a dinner with Tosh and her mom for her to come out as non-binary to her mom. And that's when I literally had to stop and take a step back and be like, this is really in my face at this point. Like, this is no longer a coming of a, like, discovering who you are. This is now a, like, let's have a coming out awkward family dinner with these two mystical creatures, or, like, you know, like, what fantasy creatures in this video game. And I was like, this is so out of place. I was like, we have now gotten into out of place territory. This is like a modern, like, you obviously, you've probably heard of, like, oh yeah, you know, Thanksgiving, the time where you freaking argue with your uncle about politics and freaking come out as gay, you know, like have an awkward coming out dinner with your family, you know, like that's what everybody, you know, like the stereotype, right? And like, this is it's literally that situation. It's literally that situation where, like, Tasha's like, hey, I'm non-binary. She just, like, freaking says it. And then the mom is like, well, maybe you're trans. I know some people in the city that are trans. You know, like, maybe you're trans. And she's like, no, Mom, I'm not trans. I'm binary, non-binary. And it's like, what the frick is going on? And the person who wrote this was non-binary. And, like, I'm not even going to say that it's not like an inaccurate portrayal of what these coming out dinners would be. It's awkward. It has responses from a parent that is clearly loving, but, like, you know, like, doesn't fully understand, and a child who, like, is also kind of confused about what's going on, and because it's different than what they've been taught their entire life, but, like, they feel strongly about it, and, like, they can't fully communicate it well. And so it's like this real breakdown of communication and ideas. And, you know, like, it's two people who still love each other, but just, like, are having difficulty understanding each other. And, like, so I'm not saying it's even, like, poorly written, you know, for what it is, but it is 100% out of place. It is 100% shoved in your face, and it 100% does not belong there. It just doesn't. And I was like, okay, this is where I start saying the political elements of this game clearly took over too much. This did not need to be here. We clearly could have cut this, and it wouldn't have been that big of a deal, or it replaced it with something that wasn't as, like, you know, stand-outy. And, you know, I get why people would be pissed off. I get why people would say this game's gone too woke. And when you start looking at all the other elements of, like, well, you know, there's a lot of HR, quote unquote, a lot of people complaining about, like, HR speak in the game, and, like, we're all trying to get along too much, and, like, you know, like, people being too nice. There's no, like, conflict really within your party or anything like that. I'm like, okay, this is honestly probably a lot of influence from a very progressive and a very probably loving and understanding progressive viewpoint, which probably came from a trans director and some non-binary writers. Like, let's be real. And, like, I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm not saying that that's even bad, but it is definitely out of freaking place. It is definitely not needed, and it is kind of awkward in this setting. So, you know, like, I kind of agree with a lot of people that, like, this game probably did take a little bit too much of a political slant in ways that it probably didn't need to. That seems a little awkward. And, you know, like, this game started off, transitioning into a slightly different topic, decent segue. This game started off at, like, an 84 on Metacritic. It's down to a 79, which that was after hundreds of reviews. So that means a lot of people had to come out of the woodwork and be like, I don't like this game, to drop the score at all. And I was watching this score go down because I picked it in my fantasy critic league for last year because the previews for this game were really good. Like people were coming out and they were like, "This is a potential game of the year candidate. Like what? Like this could be a great game." We're seeing like high scores on the horizon for this. And slowly over time, I kept losing points on it, and I was like, "What the frick is going on here?" And I just assumed maybe it was people review bombing it for like woke reasons. I thought it was probably mother effers who were jumping on this bandwagon of like, I freaking hate it because it's woke. And not the case. I ended up doing some research into it, and some people essentially were like, no, EA just didn't send out review codes to a lot of people who didn't give positive preview coverage. What the frick? So like Fextra Life is a big one. He's like very into the Dragon Age community, very, very big YouTuber, several million subscribers. And he was like, I didn't get very high profile video. I did not get a code from EA for this because I was not fully hyping up Dragon Age, the Veilguard before it came out. I was still like, maybe this could be good, maybe it could be bad. I don't know. I need to see the full game. And he ended up not getting a review code. And a lot of people echoed that and were like, no, yeah, if you had any negative coverage of the game, this would be like you would be kicked off of the freaking list for having a review code. And it's like, what the frick? So that's why the game was reviewed so much higher when it came out, was because EA was freaking trying to silence lower reviews, and why it went down to a 79, which is crazy. Also, preview coverage was like, oh yeah, dude, it's freaking amazing. Like everybody was like, it's game of the year potential. Learning, doing research onto the preview coverage, they told them, so they gave them this disparate demo of different like highlights from the game, essentially different highlight moments, and said, this is the first chapter of the game. They apparently actually gave them moments that were spread out over the course of 75% of the game. So up to chapter 9. There are 14 chapters. They gave them moments into chapter 9, which is obviously not the first frickin' chapter of the game. Or the first act. I think they said the first act. Which is incredibly disingenuous. So like previews were also like they were playing for like 5 hours or something like that. So like they had like 5 hours of content over the course of pretty much the entire game, the highlights. And to be frank, the issues with this game really don't start showing until about hour 10. Like combat is pretty good until about the 10th hour when it gets really repetitive. And, like the story starts off pretty good, and you can probably see some potential for it, within, the beginning and some of the earlier climactic moments. So, like, I think EA completely was disingenuous with their initial coverage of this, in terms of pretty much giving dishonest framing of the previews that they were sending out, and also trying to keep reviews for early release high. Like, it's not uncommon for big publishers to withhold review keys from people they think are going to give lower reviews, but like an 84 to a 79 when that many reviews are already currently out for it, bro. They knew they had a game that was not going to do well on their hands. Like they absolutely knew. And I think that's where this ultimately comes down to, is this game is incredibly disappointing. Incredibly. I had the most disappointing category on my Game of the Year list, and at that point I had not finished the game yet, but I had gotten far enough to know it was not going to be on my top 5 or have any place on any other of the categories. I think after going through all of this, I think I would probably put Dragon Age the Veilguard at... I think it may be my most disappointing game. And again, this is not of 2024, which is not to say like this game is bad, okay? Because it's not. It's okay, but okay from a studio that has made some of the best games ever made. When you look at Mass Effect 2, I think it is impossible to say that game is not one of the best games ever made. And then they put out a game like this that is trying to be Mass Effect 2. I think it is impossible not to say this is insanely disappointing. This is, you're expecting one of the, a great game, a return to form from this studio that we all knew going into it. Like, this was the death knell for them. Like, if they did not produce a game that was good or great, that this would probably be the end of Bioware. And I think this game performed so poorly. I mean, this was not a bomb, okay? Let's be real. This was not a bomb, but it was definitely a failure in a lot of ways, critically and commercially. It was not this like, well, it only sold 10,000 copies. Like, it clearly didn't do that. And it wasn't like a 64 on Metacritic. It wasn't that either. So, like, it was mixed. And, like, that's not what EA wants from this crown jewel studio that they bought. And I think we're seeing now the result of that, which is this is probably the end. I think it's safe to say that Anthem took a toll on this studio, and this is no longer the Bioware that we are used to, and that EA has cemented that. They are culling the rest of the people that are there, and they are like, you got Mass Effect, and that's it. And I can't say that I'm excited for the next Mass Effect game. I can't think that the next one will be good. Like, if this is the result of, well, we had all of EA's backing, we had all their money and all their support, and we're having people taken away, and we're probably having resources lowered because they know they're not going to make the money back on it. I think we're clearly in a situation that, like, BioWare's just dead. Like, there's no way the next Mass Effect game will be better than this, and it will be a dead. I think if I was EA, I would just shut it down. I would shut it down, and I would give the IP to just a different studio. Like, why even keep it around? Like, it's clearly not the same people. It's clearly not the same studio at that point. So why even keep it around? Just freaking close it, and just farm the IP out to somebody else. Because you can still, I think Mass Effect and Dragon Age still have enough cachet that they will be successful. Like, especially a Mass Effect. I think Mass Effect had a much larger, wide, general appeal than Dragon Age did. So, like, I think, like, a Mass Effect game, give that to another developer, they can do something really special with it, and they can make a game that this shell of a BioWare made. And I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen. But at the end of the day, this game, really underwhelming, and hate to go out on that bummer of a note, but I think it's something that has to be said. I think it's definitely, when I say it was the meat and potatoes of this episode, I knew it was going to be, because, like, it's such a large topic. You have to dissect it in so many different ways, and it's so prevalent right now. I think it's something that you have to really dissect in a significant way. So I hope I did a good job. I tried to take a lot of notes there and make sure that all the points I had got out in a cohesive, coherent way. But, I'm just an amateur. What can I say? But I appreciate you sticking around. This was all I had for this episode of the Plug and Play podcast, the first legit episode of the year. A lot of big news. I think it'll be a big year. Obviously, the Switch is going to be a big deal, Switch 2. And I think that there's a lot of big games on the horizon that are going to be really, really awesome. So I look forward to experiencing that with you, and I hope that you look forward to experiencing that with me. And until next time, hope you play a good video game or something. That'd be pretty cool. Let me know. Maybe not. Who knows? Okay, bye.